right? I have an absolute blast playing with one of the most fun decks I've ever played in Limited. Certainly recently. I was playing in this Guilds of Ravnica Gilded Sealed League, which is a really neat format where you play 3 rounds and then you add a booster pack to your, if you like, you buy another booster pack and add it into your deck, taking out, adding in cards from it, right? And then you play 3 more rounds and then you pick up another booster pack and play 3 more rounds. And each one of these sets of 3 can result in a trophy. And as you can see, as my deck got very, very good, and I got pretty skilled at playing it, look at these 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, a 2-1 there, 2 2-0s, and a single 1-2, because in the very first set, I had built the deck in a very poor manner. And after that, after I reconstructed it and fixed it, I only lost this first game. I lost 1 game after that. Everything else was a clean sweep. So this deck was amazing, and I want to show you this deck, and it was so much fun. The other thing about this, you can check out the price structure and everything else, but suffice to say, going 8 wins gets you 200 play points with an entry fee of 240 plus 2 boosters. However, you also get wins for each stage. So I entered for 240 points, but I got 40 points for 30 points for stage 1 for 2 wins, 40 for stage 2, 40 for stage 3. So that's a grand total of 310 points at a 240 entry cost. You must then subtract the price of the packs that I bought in between, which were 40 points each. So as you can see, if you go 3-0, you basically get a pack for free. So what the net result of all this is that I paid 10 play points for a pack, and I paid 40 play points for 2 packs. So 50 play points got me 3 packs of cards. And then on top of that, I got the sealed decks, the 3 other packs, for free, basically, because it was a break even on those. So after all said and done, 50 play points ended up netting me roughly, due to good polls, about 50 tickets worth of stuff, which is pretty amazing. So let's take a look at the deck. I think it was about 50 tickets. Anyway, let's take a look. So this was the final result of the deck, of the entire mess of cards that I had available to me. Of all the cards that I'm not playing, the one card that I would have very much liked to have been playing that I could not, simply because I only pulled 1 Is It Guildgate, is the Beacon Bolt here. Beacon Bolt is a card that deals damage to a creature based on the number of instant and sorceries cards, and it has Jumpstart, which means you can discard a card and replay it. In a deck with a lot of Surveil, where you can put cards with Jumpstart into your graveyard and then replay them later by discarding bad draws, that's a very powerful thing. Would have been nice to have, but you'll see soon. Well, maybe the results speak for themselves. But here's what the deck was doing. So first of all, I had tons of early interaction and cheap removal. But more importantly, I had the single most powerful, important card in the entire Dimir deck construction paradigm. Basically, I had the most important card that you can have. And what is the most important card that you can have? Is it this rare Etrata? Is it the Nightveil Predator, who is really hard to deal with? Is it this OP rare? Absolutely not. It's none of those things. It is actually Nightveil Sprite. Nightveil Sprite, of which I had 2, is insanely good. This card is this is like a reusable ponder that triggers your Surveil effects over and over and over again while chipping away at your opponent's life total. Totally insane. But what makes it insane is, of course, the rest of the cards in the format. Most notable of which is Disinformation Campaign. Thankfully, I had one of those early on. So when this thing comes down, it acts as both a Jayemdae Tome and Disrupting Scepter activation, all for the price of a Disrupting Scepter activation. So for 3 mana, you make your opponent discard and you draw a card, which is crazy. But if you look at this curve, you can actually play a Sprite, play Disinformation Campaign, take a card from them, draw a card, attack with Sprite, pick up the Disinformation Campaign and say go, so that on the next turn you can play the Disinformation Campaign again, attack with the Sprite, pick it back up again. And of course, if you have 1-drops, then on turn 4 you can make that play and remove something that they've done, which is really great. So that was one thing that the deck could do very well. It could easily lock your opponent out to having no cards in hand. But the other thing that works great with it is this Darkblade Agent. He becomes a 2/3 death touch that draws a card when you deal damage to your opponent if you surveil. So having a way to go turn 2 Sprite, turn 3 attack, make your next draw better, play the agent. He now is going to have death touch because you surveil with Sprite, not on damage being dealt, but when you attack. So you attack, boom, the Darkblade Agent, the surveil clause kicks in, and he now will have death touch, making it hard for your opponent to block, and you can start drawing extra cards off of that. So that's another engine in here. The other thing that was incredible in this deck is that I have 2 exclamation mark copies of Devious Cover-Up. And Devious Cover-Up is so great in a format with like Jumpstart and other Graveyard Matters cards because it's a 4-mana card that counters a spell and exiles the thing you're countering, but more importantly, it comes with its own built-in Gaia's Blessing. So when you play this card, you can shuffle up to 4 cards from your graveyard in your library, and it does not exile itself, which means with 2 Devious Cover-Ups, the second one can shuffle the first one in along with the rest of your counter magic, in which case, I'm sorry about that. My counter is Sinister Sabotage and Disdainful Stroke, so I can Devious Cover-Up, shuffling in counter, 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 and actually get in a loop where I'm drawing extra cards every turn with a Sprite, say, and a Disinformation Campaign. My opponent has an empty hand, can't hold cards because of this card. I'm drawing 2 cards per turn and milling off anything I don't want and reshuffling infinite counterspells into my deck. It's so amazing and so good. And I'm about to show you what I mean. So before the first, I'm going to basically skip the very first one because in the first build, I was playing with some cards from, I had drafted, this is my 2nd or 3rd attempt at drafting with this deck, sealed deck. And the other attempts were kind of mixed. The first time around, I took Dimir as my guild. I built like this, but I didn't know what was in the format, so I didn't know which removal cards were good. I didn't know when I should counter, when I shouldn't. It makes it very difficult to play, but that's what you do. Sometimes you just dive into the deep end and then learn to swim after the fact, right? So I struggled through that. The second time around, I had a good idea of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to stick with the blue-black. However, my second go-around card pool was atrocious. However, I was sabotaging myself as well in both of these, I think. I was playing a lot of cards that would trigger Surveil, but I didn't have, well, I don't know if I was sabotaging myself. I either didn't have or didn't use Night Veil Sprite, which was a huge problem. The deck really needs this card to run, I think, because I was using cards like Watcher in the Mist and Mephitic Vapors and Dimir Informant, cards that have like one-shot surveil effects and a lot of downside because the cards aren't really very strong on their own, so you're just using them to surveil. So I started out round 1 using the same cards, the 4 cards I just showed you, and it went horribly for me. It was very bad because the cards just aren't good. Like, the upside of surveil is not enough to make playing a bad card into a good experience. And that was the thing I needed to learn. And finally, once I got that figured out and realized that what you want is a surveil-based deck with good cards, not a deck that has a bunch of bad cards, but they trigger surveillance. And in fact, I still have 1 card like that in this deck. This card is Discovery Dispersal is fairly mediocre. However, I needed it I used it for a little bit of smoothing early on, and then the dispersal effect can theoretically deal with something like Night Veil Predators. I figured 1 as a hedge might be okay, so I ran just the 1. But also, my card pool was getting quite like I was running out of options here after a certain point. So, for example, I have a Capture Sphere over here, which is a instant speed kind of pacifism, but Capture Sphere is terrible in my deck because I am running 2 Plague Crafters, and I'm running 2 Plague Crafters because everybody's running Capture Sphere effects. They're running pacifism effects, and this allows me to 2-for-1 them. The other thing that, well, not 2-for-1 them, but potentially 2-for-1 them, So they pacify one of my creatures. I Plague Crafter it away, killing one of their creatures, and then trade the Plague Crafter for another one of their creatures. And that's how I end up with the 2-for-1 potentially. But also Spinal Centipede is a good combo with it. And you just need some early defense on the ground to gum up the board while spriting them. It's also quite good to run Sprite with a Centipede, because then they really don't want to attack, because now you've got a 2-3 beating them in this air and surveilling, and that's harder to deal with in a much faster clock. So, it's kind of scary. So it goes from a 20-turn kill to a 10-turn kill. Anyway, enough on that. Anyway, the first build of the deck was frankly terrible. And after that, I decided I'm going to strip out all the cards that I think I need for Surveil, and I'm going to see if I can rely on just Sprites and any other cards that incidentally happen to have Surveil while being useful. So Discovery is fairly useful for smoothing early draws, I guess. And then Sinister Sabotage is just straight up good. Counterspell Surveil is a good thing. But if you notice, there really isn't a lot of other. I just have the 2 Sprites. Thought Erasure, which is the res, Thoughtseize basically, with a surveillance effect for 1 more blue and no life loss. Quite good. So, I've got these 3 minor little ones, and of course my Dream Eater has Surveil at the very end of the game, but nothing else. And it worked just fine. It worked beautifully. The sprites are amazing. So let's take a look at, I'm going to start with rebuilding the deck, making it good, and we're going to start with that. Now, I did at a certain point, I guess one other thing is that I had these 3 Golgari Guild Gates. And early on, I used them to run these Molder Hulks to see what I thought about them. So the thinking was that a 9-mana 6/6, well, is not good, but a 6/6 is good. And a 6/6 whose cost goes down the more you surveil other creatures in your graveyard, especially running Plague Crafters who are going to kill creatures you control. Obviously, you're going to be killing your own and surveilling your own. Well, that looks quite nice. So I was thinking that would be a very strong card in this deck. And as it turned out, it was okay, as you'll see in a few games. But there's only 11 creatures, and 2 of them are sprites. One of them is an agent. Like, some of these creatures I don't want to be surveilling into the graveyard. So, in fact, very few of them do I actually want to do that with. So I didn't really get the cost reduction that I thought I was going to get with the Molder Hulks. I ended up paying almost full price for them. And while they did their job, I wouldn't recommend them for this kind of deck now that I've got the experience of using them. The green, however, did come in handy much later in the finals, as you'll see, or in the final set. So let's take a look at some games, and that's because of a sideboard card I haven't touched on yet. So I have an amazing start right here. I have a Thought Erasure into Disinformation Campaign, which is the Jayemdae tome, Disrupting Scepter. But more importantly, top deck Sprite. If my opponent doesn't kill this Sprite, I think they just lose right here. All right, so they play a 2-3, a 2-2. Basically, it pumps your creature's toughness the turn it comes into play. All right, let's start Jayemdae tome, Disrupting Sceptering my opponent. And hey, I think I'd like to make my draw a little bit better. You can see I had Captures here in this version, because this version... the cards get better as you add packs, right? So this is the very early version of the deck. All right, so my opponent pumps up his 3-3, and I'm going to go ahead and Thought Erasure them, because I think that getting into my opponent's hand here and sitting on a Disdainful Stroke for a 4-drop sounds real good. So I left him with just what you see there. Opponent goes for a Vigilance creature and then a Convoke creature. That's why I left it there. I was hoping this would happen, so now they're down to just a little pump card. All right, so I can curve here, lock it into Scepter Book, and boom, there goes the last card from their hand. So we'll go ahead and pick up my Jayemdae tome. Yeah, I had the Izzet 4/3, which can't attack until you play Instant or Sorcery in here, simply to gum up the ground. And when you don't have like the full set of packs and you have to make do, you make do, right? All right, so let's get down with the 4/3. But that'll do a really good job here of making trades. And you notice that my opponent is just in this horrible situation. They cannot hold tricks. They must draw cards that they can play here, because if they have to top deck, they're not going to be able to play it. They can't hold lands and threaten me, so it allows me to play with perfect information every turn. All right, here comes Etrata. So this Etrata Yeah, I still had Mephitic Vapors in here. So this Etrata, what it does is it's a 3/5 who for 4, which is fantastic at just gumming up the board, and that's what I used it for. Like 9 times out of 10, it just sits in play at like a moat and allows me to just continuously. Basically, this deck has Disrupting Scepter, Jayemdae Tome, and Moat in it, and that's what I use it for. But occasionally, I might have to attack with it. What it does when you attack is it can't be blocked, and then after you hit your opponent with it, you get to exile one of their creatures and then reshuffle Etrata back into your deck. If you do this 3 times successfully, you win the game on the spot instantly. Although, in reality, you would have won the game if you could manage to pull that off 3 times regardless. Now, the cool thing about it being in my deck is, 1, it functions as a moat. That's the most cool thing. But 2, because I can actually get to the bottom of my deck pretty quickly with the Fairy Disinformation Campaign combo, I can actually run myself out of cards down to just the counter loop I was talking about. But the counter loop won't actually kill my opponent. I need a win con in there somewhere. Etrata will. So I can trot him out. I can Etrata him out and then attack with him, shuffle him back into my deck, so I'm not decking myself, and just keep doing that over and over. Anyway, we'll spin through the rest of this game. So my opponent's got a creature who creates 1/1s when it becomes tapped. I see it here. I'm just gonna. I don't know what they're thinking here. I'm obviously just going to block. Before I could even finish my box, my opponent just gives up. Pretty silly. Like at that point, right? It's super game over. They can't hold anything, and as you can see, I'm just building up tons of walls and removal, and that's not going to work out too well for him. So that was game 1. It went quickly, thanks to the insane power of the fairy. And in game 2, a very nice draw, very nice against green-white, obviously, having lots of cheap removal. Opponent gets a Vigilance creature. We'll go ahead and get rid of that thing. Want to try to make Convoke as difficult for my opponent as I can. Let's go ahead and get rid of that thing. I want to play Disinformation Campaign soon, but I also don't want to give my opponent time. Disdainful Stroke that, and what a nice curve that was. All right, with that in mind, let's go ahead and start the Jayemdae Toming. I get a 3/4 with Convoke. 3/4, I think it is. Yeah. It gives him life. Opponent has no play for the turn, which is great. So I'm just going to sit on a counterspell and say go. Now they're down to only 2 cards in hand, so okay, there's a target. And I'm going to reshuffle in my removal and my counterspell. Now's a good time, of course, to throw down a hexproof creature that I'm tapped out. I can't protect, but don't have to. I'll play a Etrata, but I want to do that when my opponent has no cards in hand, like now. And at this point, the game is basically over. So my opponent's out of cards. Unless they top deck something amazing right here, I'm just going to block and then boom, counter magic up, and I drew a fairy. It's so good. All right, goodbye 3/3. And I probably should not have attacked there, honestly, but I was so excited about my card that I just figured I would. I don't know why. I should have just sat there being a moat, and then if my opponent had drawn an actual threat, then I could have dealt with that. But fortunately, so my opponent here draws a few cards off the locket pre-combat, which is crazy, or like on their turn, which is crazy because they can't play it. So now I'm gonna Disrupting Scepter them here. Like they can't. They should have waited till my end step, because then the Disinformation Campaign couldn't have taken one of those cards from them. All right, that'll be a Disdainful Stroke, and at this point, my opponent's given up. Was that the second Disdainful Stroke? It was. Now notice, of course, that I only have 1 Disdainful Stroke in the deck, but that's the power of course, drawing multiple cards, and that counterspell that I think is super overlooked right now, the Devious cover-up. I don't think people are using it, and I don't know that it belongs in every deck, but holy smokes is this thing really, really good for a control deck. So that was a smooth, 2-0, and we'll take a look at some of these others. And we're on to game 3 in round 1 against El Grandanes? El Grandanes? I don't know. Anyway. All right. Opponent's play on the play and leads off with a very aggressive courier there. Torch carrier? Courier. That's strange. Anyway, so this person is able to sack that thing and give a creature haste if they want. So I go ahead and get into their hand and take out a Lava Coil, which is an excellent removal card for creatures in this format. Opponent then plays a threat, and I run out Darkblade Agent, who I was thinking could block the 2/1, but I forgot about the Menace ability. So I take out the 2/1, play a Sprite, and pass. Opponent then gives his flyer haste and sends in so he can use Menace right away. I'm going to have to double block here, and he kills the wrong creature. Not the Sprite. That was a mistake. All right, so I'm going to bash in and leave a Necrotic Wound on top. Pick up a Disinformation Campaign. Opponent has no cards in hand now, and is totally playing off the top. And that is just not going to work out. There's a Molder Hulk that like I said, I had in this deck. You can see how the build was set up. I don't play the Disinformation Campaign here because, okay, I wanted to go ahead and make a trade here. So I'm going to Dream Eater, get rid of cards I don't want, keep a counterspell, bounce the 4/2, and block and kill the 3/3. And then the 4/2 I just bounced goes away with my Disrupting Scepter effect. And I find another counterspell on top of my deck. So I now have a counterspell in hand, a counter on top, and Disrupting Scepter again. Smash, pick it up. A Gorgon I don't want, but I decide I'll keep it just because it can handle, I can save something that Deadweight might not be able to deal with. So my opponent plays Direct Current, which is a jumpstart removal spell, which means that their next card they draw, they can counter with it as well. So I counter it with Devious Cover-Up, which exiles the card, so I don't have to worry about that. So another reason why that counter is amazing. Continue to Jayemdae Tome / Disrupting Scepter my opponent. Go ahead and get some board presence down in case they get a haste creature. Oh, opponent held a card. Let's take that away. And pick up a counterspell again. Play a Trotta, and so the next card is counter target 4 casting cost or higher. And of course, I've got a counter in hand. And at this point, there's only 11 cards left in my library. So we're down to 2 counters to come out. My opponent's at 18 and they just give up. But if they hadn't given up, let's assume for whatever, like you can't keep attacking with the 3/5. It looks impressive. This is the mistake I made in the other one. You should just sit on the card unless you have a reason to attack and just let it be a wall, because it's really more of a wall that happens to sacrifice itself to destroy target creature. Is what it is. So really, I don't have a heck of a curve here, or a lot of pressure with the opponent at 18. If they played removal on this guy, for example, I would certainly let that go. But with only 11 cards in library and a second Devious Cover-Up in the deck, I'm about to go infinite on counter magic. And I don't know if that's why they scooped or if they were worried about time, because that was a 12-minute game. And if they were worried about time, that's probably reasonable. But at any rate, they scoop and we move on to game 2. I mean, they'd certainly lost the game, but anyway, there is something very demoralizing about not getting to keep a hand ever. All right, look at this. I get an erasure right here, and I erase a Lava Coil out of their hand for the second time this game. And opponent rips a Bojack Bodyguard as a follow-up for the second time this game. I'd really like to get my Sprite out here, but I know they have a patrol, and I'm hoping that I can Disdainfully Stroke to counter that, and that works out nicely for me, so we'll get rid of that. And I need to get something going on the board, so I'm going to throw out Wall of Atrata and hope that that does it. And it does. My opponent stops swinging. He only has 1 card in hand. So now I'm going to run out the Agent and the Sprite on a calculated risk that they don't draw removal right here or anything backbreaking. Any big creature I can attack and kill with Atrata. So as long as it's not removal, and because then if I untap, it's all upside here. I've got the combo, Darkblade Agent and the Sprite. I do make a mistake here, as I recall. I should have played Plaguecraft or pre-combat, but I don't. So I swing in, mill off an island. My opponent does not block, however, and with that, they're toast. Because now I'm going to draw 2 cards per turn. I should have removed one of their creatures. It was such a mistake pre-combat. and also not swung with a Trotta. But as I said, I was getting used to how the card plays out. So here I probably also should have played Plaguecrafter and sat on the Sabotage, which I did not do, which was probably a mistake there as well. Just some of this play is just foolish, I think. I was still hoping to get the combo to go with the Plaguecrafter, which would be that... oh, wow. So I mill off a Deadweight here and swing in, go for another card. So the problem with his creature that he's having is it can't attack or block alone. So, and I've reduced it to just that one creature. Now I've got a Dream Eater to really make things bad for my opponent, and a Necrotic Wound, which is an instant speed removal. So I mill off a Sprite because 1 Sprite is amazing, 2 Sprite is redundant. Although, I mean, sometimes redundant is good, but it's fine. I can always shuffle it back in later with my counterspell if I need to. Opponent plays a Legion Guildmage here, which obviously I'm not going to counter. But for tempo purposes, I may end up bouncing it with Dream Eater. I'm not sure if I make that play here or not. So I played these last night. Nah, I guess I just kill it with Necrotic Wound. Save my counter, leave my counter magic up, and because that way they can't instantly, play instant speed removal for the agent, which is killing them. And as you can see, the power of the Sprite, man, it's undeniably strong. So we move on to so that wraps up the first 3, and I was kind of sad about the the first 3, and I was kind of sad about the initial one where I had built the deck so poorly and lost. But I shake it off, grab a booster, add it to the deck, and get the one last game loss that I'll get for the rest of the entire series here. So let's take a look how this goes. All right, so here we are in the second set of 3, and I've got a very playable hand. All it's missing is a fairy to go become bonkers, right? Opponent runs out an Iron Shell Beetle. I'm just going to get rid of that thing immediately, making my Plaguecrafter that much better. See, I've still got Watcher in the Mists in here right now. Still haven't gotten smart about them yet. What I did was I cut the green and I put the Watchers back in, I think. Ooh, top deck Fairy and a kill spell, which is so good to go together. And now I get to start the Jayemdae Tome effect. My opponent, 1 card in hand. Let's Disrupting Scepter that. And bang. No cards in hand, and no cards against this deck is death. So now I'm just going to play a Trotta out here because I don't have a counter up, but it addresses any creature that they could play, and as long as they don't kill the Sprite, like, what are they going to do, right? But meanwhile, I mean, this combo is kind of, it's almost like, feels like in old school Magic when you have a Library of Alexandria running or something. Although, like I said, the best thing I can compare it to, because it's 3 mana per turn, is a Disrupting Scepter that also has a Jayemdae Tome attached to it. So it's kind of like having a Library of Alexandria and a Scepter running. It's just crazy how good that is. Anyway, so we move into game 2. And I'm going to lose the last game that I'm going to lose. Watcher in the Mist is so bad. You can see, like, look how slow and clunky it is. I'm stuck in my hand there. Opponent plays a Junkie Death Touch creature. Don't care about that at all. All right, so I'm going to run out Centipede here with the hopes of playing Plaguecrafter, sacking the Centipede and getting a 4/3. Unfortunately, my opponent plays Deadweight there. So I decide, instead of Plaguecraftering a 1/1 trash creature, I'm going to sit on a counterspell for turn 4. But they don't have a drop here. Instead, they have Notion Rain, so they get to draw 2 cards. That's not good. All right, well, in that case, I decide I'll play a card that is fairly good size, and then try to deal with whatever it is that they play after the fact. They play some removal. Okay, not a big deal. I'm going to sit on the Dream Eater with the thought that if they run out something big here, I Dream Eater the small one and then Plaguecrafter away the big thing. So they run out a Death Touch creature and another small creature, which makes this plan a lot weaker. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce the Assassin there. I do get to start putting my combo together with the Surveil effect. So let's get the Sprite down. After killing one of their guys, of course. Good. All right. And I've got just enough mana to disdainful stroke here. I can put a little pressure on my opponent, force my opponent's mana to, keep using Guild Mage on the 4/3, making it hard for them to do too much there. They decide to play the Death Touch guy, but that's not that great because, obviously I'm going to be able to run out here this Death Touch guy and attack with flyers, and it looks like I should win this game. I mean, I'm in good shape. I'm going to trade card for card here, no big deal. My opponent's going to probably at some point realize they need to tap my flyer. Okay, they do. Their guy did manage to steal a little tempo from me. And here I think I'm getting foolish. I go for more... Well, no, I go for the Etrata, which I don't think is a mistake, but I should have considered running out the agent right there. I do get to counter a tap down for the Etrata, but then my opponent plays a big troll, and I decide I don't want to get trolled by my opponent, so I shuffle it in. Again, probably a bit of a mistake there. My opponent's under a lot of pressure. I could have waited and look at what I would have been able to deal with if I had. Problems got quite bad all of a sudden. So I do have a flyer here, but my opponent can block the flyer with the 3/2. And because I'm greedy for the win, I don't trade the 3/3 for the 6/6. I don't Death Touch the 6/6 here, so I take 6 to the face. And things are getting really, really bad for me. So go ahead and send in with this guy because my opponent's at 2 and I can get rid of their tapper. But now I have to make this trade anyway. So wouldn't I have been a heck of a lot better if I would have had 6 more life here? If I'd be at 10 right now, I might have a pretty good chance of getting somewhere. But because right here I'd be at 10 and then I'd drop down to 7 instead of 1. So I dropped to 7 had I blocked earlier. And then from here, I wouldn't necessarily lose the game, right? I'd be able to take 2 more hits before I'd have 2 more draw phases before, or 3 really. Take 2 hits, that's 2 draws, and then 1 last draw to try to finish this game off. So that was a mistake there, and I paid for it. And that's how Magic is. You should pay for mistakes. But we move into game 3, and because the game went long, I sideboard into my 6/6 plan with my... he's got a lot of removal, and the game was very slow. He's very late game kind of deck over there. So the 6/6s should come down fairly cheaply and quickly. Also, more importantly, I've got an active sprite early on, and this is always a factor towards success. So opponent runs out of Locket. Okay. I'm going to play land and pass because I have a counterspell up. Opponent has a Notion Rain with 6 cards in hand. I decide I'm going to counter it anyway. And smash. I make a mistake and mill off an island there. A mistake in the sense that it's foolish because what I'm not paying attention to is the fact that I do need 2 islands to run this deck. And my second source is right now the Dimir Locket. And so I need to be able to... sack the Locket to get cards, but at the same time, I also need to see. I mill off an island again. I'm going to pay for it, but then I won't have 2 blue, and I'm thinking like it's a little bit aggressive to assume that I will get the blue mana I need when I've already gotten rid of multiple islands here. So opponent taps down the sprite, and I let it happen because I'm nervous about what their follow-up play is. They've got a lot of mana and they're a big green deck. Play, as it turns out, is just sacking the Locket, so I'm going to keep pace with them on cards, but I'm now going to pay for not having the blue mana. Ouch. Since I can't counter anyway, we'll go ahead and just post-combat run out a bunch of threats and hope that they don't sweep my board. They don't, but they do get to develop themselves a little bit. Another double blue card. Awful. So I'm going to press for damage and make bigger creatures. Unfortunately, I probably should not have sent the Death Touch guy. I don't know. Maybe it was a mistake, but at any rate, my opponent's going to get a free card here, so we'll see. And then removes my 3/4, which would have produced additional cards for me. So I'm now done because I need to sit on a counter here, and I can deal with the card drawing engine, and I can take 3 for a little while before I don't need to like pull the trigger too early. The 3/3 Flying Death Touch Hexproof is already answered by the 3/4, so it's not like it's not going to block the 1/1. It doesn't want to block the 3/4. But I don't want him trading it with the spider, so I decide the spider is the card I'm gonna go after there. All right, I can now shrink his 3/4 into a 1/2, and that's basically not going to be able to block the 3/3. I get a sprite out, kill off his 1/2 because he chooses to chump. He plays a 1/3, another chumper, card drawing chumper. I'm going to let it all through, obviously, right there. Yes, Disdainful Stroke. That's what I want to see. There's a Plague Crafter there too, which is going to give me card advantage off of the Capture Sphere. Opponent goes for a big threat, and I have Stroke right on time. I'm down to only 15 cards in library. Opponent's down to 10. Trades with my Fairy, unfortunately, before I can Plague Crafter them, and then falls prey to his inability to deal with the 3/3 flyer. Doesn't have a blocker and can't target it, so the untargetable vampire takes the game for me. So very nice set of 3, and from there we are not going to drop another game. All right, so let's take a look at the rest of these. So match 2, round 2, match 2, and this looks like a keep here. I decided that I liked the green edition, so I decided to keep that in the deck for a little bit longer, and that's going to stay that way until I get another pack, I believe. And I've got a very nice draw. Any hand with early removal and a disinformation campaign is a hand that I'm pretty happy to see. All right, so and my opponent's mulliganed here too, so that's super brutal. They're down to only 3 cards in hand. Make that 2. So I'm sitting on a counter here because I'm concerned about what they could be doing, and they have no play, so that was a bit of a bummer for me. I go ahead and shrink their guy, because it's still going to be a problem for me, but it'll buy me some time, and then even a 2/3 will deal with that creature. Okay, good thing I was cautious with my counter magic, I guess. I go ahead and recur the dead weight, because I think that it might have some value at some point. Find myself in a Trotta. Opponent's down to 3 cards, but I haven't been able to get into their hand anymore with the campaign. You can see how important the fairies are in this deck. There are, like I said, a couple of Surveil cards. We're really looking for an enabler here. So my 3/5 wall is just, doing what walls do. It basically is what it is. If my opponent plays something great, then of course I can swing and kill it, but then I lose my virtual mode effect. That's nice. So 3/3 Flying Death Touch Hexproof gives me some redundancy on the defensive side, and it's a good thing because here comes a 7/5 Hexproof that he convoked out. I, on the other hand, just have this full price 9 mana 6/6, but at least I have 3 huge blockers, and it's a good thing too because you can see the Luminous Bonds that just came down. Makes it so that my opponent has actually got 1 less threat to deal with, and now plays a Cavalier, and almost makes a fairly Cavalier attack, but then decides against it. So the opponent's creature, when it dies, it's going to make 2 2/2/2s and a 4/4, but they're not willing to just slam it into my creature. They're not willing to just run his guy into my 6/6 and just let it die. And because they're unwilling to do that, and I've got 3 really good blockers to punish any attacks here and enough life to deal with it, I'm just able to build up a hand of counter magic for a little while. So opponent's going to go for removal, and I'm going to disdainfully stroke that. I've got Devious Cover-Up, so I can shuffle the Cover-Up back in at some point. I leave the Pelt Collector alone. I'm not going to stop a 1/1. No abilities. Done, because I don't want to tap out until I get a chance to empty my opponent's hand. Ooh, well, and another blocker is good. Just keep this ground nice and gummed up, since I have inevitability. Locket is excellent. Now, if my opponent continues to not make a play, I get to draw cards. However, he goes for a 4/5 flyer that I decide I don't want to trade my 3/3 Flying Death Touch Hexproof off for, So I'm going to go and sack in response and decide maybe... So I thought about it, but the reality is, like, I don't actually mind that trade all that much. All right, so now I get to kill my Etrata there and get a little bit of card advantage back from that. And I'm sitting on another counter. Because it will turn on my Necrotic Wound, which makes things a little bit better for me. All right, so he sends in, I'm going to trade. And now I have multiple creatures in the graveyard, so I can Necrotic Wound the Pelt Collector with the Pelt Collector's growth ability on the stack. That's one less thing for me to worry about there. All right, so I've got this here Plague Crafter. I'm also making, so the other reason for letting creatures die was to make my Molder Hulks cheaper. When it goes for a 4/4 that's going to pump all the creatures that convoked with it. I'm going to counter that, and Disinformation Campaign goes back to my hand, which means I get the Scepter, the last card out of my opponent's hand, and Book. So now I'm playing with Perfect Information again. And you can see that the card advantage of the Plague Crafters and such is lined up really nicely because, so the Scepter found, or the campaign found a Night Veil Sprite there, and now my card engine is running.
Thomas, move, please.
When it goes for a 1/2 that draws a card, I absolutely don't care about that at all. And then runs out of Convoke Vigilance and ends with no cards in hand. So this guy who gives you 3 creatures when he dies is going back into your hand, sir. And then I'm going to dig for more counter magic. I actually think I milled off most of the cards that we saw. I do take a second Sprite, though, just because it's cheap and easy way to get another blocker into play. Kill his Death Touch creature, Plague Crafter away, one of his tokens just because, and I'm sitting on a counter. So, opponent's got a flyer. Don't want that. Ground's nice and gummed up. So I'm going to shuffle in all my counter spells, which is all of them. 100% of my counter spells that I've used are now back into the deck. And there it is, back into my hand. I'm going to push now for damage. Find myself another counterspell on top, so we'll go ahead and take that as well. I get to 2 for 1 my opponent with the 6/6 and pass. And notice that my deck only has 3 cards in it. All right, so let's pick up the Disinformation Campaign. Library now has 2 cards in it, but one of them is Etrata, so he's going to reshuffle himself back in to the library repeatedly. So... as soon as my opponent makes a play, of course, I'm going to deviously cover it up and shuffle the other devious cover up back into my deck, along with probably, I would throw in whatever, a Night Veil Spectre, Molder Hulk, and maybe Plague Crafter or something along those lines. And just continuously loop, at this point with only 2 cards in my library, continuously loop through. And of course, it doesn't matter because my opponent's dead from this Air Force here. The Dream Eater going unanswered was enough to beat them. But if that had been killed early enough to where I needed to continuously kill them with sprites, as you can see, it's 100% doable. They can't sandbag cards because of this thing. And they can't really keep creatures in play because of this recurring Abyss effect. That pretty much just acts like a moat and an Abyss at times. And so what are you going to do? Well, this opponent chose to scoop. So that was turn 25. Was that game 1 or 2? I think that was... was that game 1 or 2? Well, let's take a look. I don't quite recall. I think that was game 2. Okay. Yeah, that was game 2. Right? Because they're going to play a 2-drop here, or am I wrong? Maybe that was game 1. Okay, so that was game 1. I'm sorry. So, yeah. So anyway, game 2, I know that they're running a bunch of Convoke stuff, so I tried to slow them down a little bit there and still counter their play. And now I'm going to go after cards in hand and kill their other creature to try to stall them out, finding myself a Sprite with a counter spell up. And at this point, my opponent has sideboarded in Crushing Canopy, I assume, and I'm going to take that out. Targeting the Sprite, which is correct, although if they'd target the Disinformation Campaign, might have been a good target as well. Either way, so they get a Luminous Bonds down, unfortunately, so I'm not going to recur. But I do get to take one last card out of their hand for now. More to come. And, of course, we'll 2-for-1 them off the Sprite with the sack of creature guys later. And then recur the Sprites back in with the Devious Cover-Up. So I'm going to draw a couple extra cards here off the Locket at the end of their turn. Play a Source of Green for the big Hulk and pass. I'm not super happy here because I've got one counter, which is good, but only one counter, which is bad. And I don't have an engine running. It goes for a big 5/5, and I figure, okay, well, I'll counter that. Just for a chance to reshuffle in card draw as well as more counters myself. And now, time to slam out a giant 6/6. I'll get a trot out in a minute, but the 6/6 can attack multiple times. And my opponent's last card in hand is removal. Bummer. All right, well, let's play the little Moat Abyss effect that I've got here. Right now it's going to be a Moat. Okay, so there's one of my second Devious. And with my opponent playing a removal spell, it's time to use it. So I'll shuffle in 2 6/6s and a counterspell. And of course I'll draw a land. This game got a lot harder here because I'm about to go through a series of bad draws, basically. However, notice that my opponent's aggro deck has taken me all the way down to exactly 20 life at this point in the game. So I get to Dream Eater here, which is amazing, right? Set up the top of my library, recur Disinformation Campaign, bounce their enchantment that pins a creature down, trade with their guy, and trick. And basically, so I was hoping this is what's going to happen. I bounce their Luminous Bonds under the crossing my fingers saying, please put it on a Trotta or my flyer. Please put it on a Trotta or my flyer. Because if they unlock the Sprite here, they're completely doomed. There's no way they can win with their Disinformation Campaign running. The only hope they have is to keep the Sprite down and find another solution for these threats. But they took the bait. They replayed Luminous Bonds on Natrata, and now I get to Disinformation Campaign recur with Nightveil Sprite, and there's just no beating that. Okay, let's mill off junk, smash for 5, and also. Now I can just afford to throw away removal on creatures. When it goes for Finality, which I counter. Decides not to swing in, I guess. I'm not sure why there. They should have attacked for 2. I don't know. Maybe they're feeling slightly hopeless at this point. Plays a 1/4 with Reach, which I'm just going to tap down. There's a Thought Erasure I can use to trigger Disinformation Campaign. I'm going to go ahead and swing in. I want the big guy, so we'll go ahead and do that. Okay. Pass again. I'm going to play Sworn Companions. I'm going to go ahead and kill one of their creatures. And at this point, I have 2 counterspells left in my deck and only 8 cards. I'm drawing 2 cards per turn. My opponent's at 5. I've got flyers, and as long as I don't swing with the 6/6 and let them block and gain some life and live for the turn, we're good to go. So, if my opponent had held a card here on the critical turn, then of course I could have just Thought Erasured it out of their hand, and if it was a land, it would have picked up Disinformation Campaign, and I just play that and take that card too. So there was no getting out of that trap. Thank you, fairies. Sprites. All right, so we're going to El Grandanes here. Is that right? Oh, I'm sorry. I did that exactly backwards. We were just on that person last time. Apologies. Wrong league. Yeah, Gilded Sealed League is what you want. I guess Gilded is a pun here. El Grandanes, 1, 2, 3. No, I guess that is the opponent. Okay, so let's go to game 3, round 1. Or set 2, match 3, game 1. And oh, I see what happened. So when I was replaying earlier, what I did was I apologize. Wow, I really need to get it together here. What I did was I played set 3 first by mistake there. So, oops. So I'm going backwards. So let's play Skiffer then. So we did Skiffer. We did Moonpie Mandy. We did El Grandane. Somehow I reversed those 2. That's my dyslexia kicking in. Anyway, we're going to move to stage 3. And so now I got to add one last booster, and the deck was the exact version that you've seen now. And we're going to go to game 1. And you'll see with the tuned version how much smoother things go. Well, my opponent's deck are more tuned as well, but how much better the deck just operates, of course. And I have a picture-perfect hand here with Night Veil Sprite on turn 2 and a turn 3 Darkblade Agent or Disinformation Campaign. Opponent's got a turn 2, 3, 1. I actually make this game harder than it should be. The correct play here is Plague Crafter, but I'm greedy and I play Darkblade Agent, thinking that I could entice my opponent into not attacking here because they need to block the agent. Unfortunately, they do not, so I start eating damage early, and they have removal. Very bad for me. They remove the Sprite, so this is bad news. So I take a card there and pass. Take some more damage when I probably should be blocking, but okay. Thought Erasure, a card out of my opponent's hand, and my opponent scoops here. So the reason they scooped is that I'm leaving my opponent with only a 5 mana play, another 5 mana play, and a 6 mana play. And what's going to happen, of course, is I get to pick up Disinformation Campaign. I can attack and draw a card. I can play Disinformation Campaign and draw another card. Or what I would actually do is I would attack and draw, pick this up, of course, play Centipede and pass. And then that way I would happily trade the Centipede off with either of their creatures if they attack with one or both, making my agent a little bit better. And then on the next turn, Plague Crafter the other creature away and continue the Disinformation Campaign. Most likely I would have found a land somewhere in there, so I would have been able to go Plague Crafter Campaign, hit your hand again, and kill the last creature that they have in play. And then from there, I'm just beating them down with a 3/4 agent. So pretty good stuff there. So good game 1. Game 2, which was much longer of a game. So a little bit of a mistake. I think maybe just me not playing. I should have protected my life total a little bit more aggressively, perhaps, but it turned out not to have mattered. So that's fine. Another very good hand. And this time we have a reason to potentially play Discovery here. But fortunately, I top deck a Gilded, which is just perfect with curve with the dead weight in my hand. So I get to take out a creature. My opponent puts a land on top of their deck, so they're digging 4 lands here. Now I think I'm going to set myself up here. So I'm going for the Centipede into Plague Crafter turns. Because as much as I want a Disinformation Campaign, I don't have a way to recur it yet. Unfortunately, my opponent is a Burglar Rat. So it's a Ravenous Rat that which means that my Plague Crafter play is not really very good at all because it's just going to kill a 3/1. So I need the rat off the board before I can do anything. So I go ahead and Disinformation to dig. My opponent's got removal. I kind of like the fact that the 3/2s really incentivize your opponent to play removal on them as soon as they can, regardless of whether or not that's a good thing. Here I get a fantastic play where I take a card out of my opponent's hand and sit on a Disdainful Stroke as opposed to running out Locket into the card, which might have been better. Hindsight, of course, it would have been, but I'm still convinced that I need to sit on a Disdainful Stroke, so I take another card from them. So the only card left in their hand, well, 2 cards, I don't know what they are, is where we're at. I really don't want a Plague Crafter, but at this point I'm running out of options. Okay, there's an option. Let's get the Flying Blocker out, who can deal with the rat at least, but won't deal with the 3/1. And he sends in both. Yes! I'll take the 2, happy. And opponent plays a 7/7, super scary. All right, we're going to Plague Crafter one of those away. And I've now got a Disdainful Stroke up. Opponent's got 2 cards in hand. Plays a land. I'm going to go ahead and trade, obviously. 3/3 for 7/7. And opponent has no play, and I've got 3 counterspells in hand. So Locket, pass, and I'm feeling real good now. Even though I'm at 2, opponent goes for a Crawl Foragers. So I let that go because I'm holding Plague Crafter. There's no reason to counter what I can kill. And we'll take that out. And I'm thinking, should I play the Sprite here or not? Well, there's too much downside if I play the Sprite here. So I'm just going to sit on the counter and wait one more turn, and then I can play the Sprite, and I can protect it from cheap removal if I need to. And then I can start the engine. Opponent has expensive removal, but I decide ultimately I'm not going to try to protect it because I'm too worried about whatever it is that my opponent can do. And I can fetch the Locket as plan B and just draw extra cards. And I'll find another Sprite, or I'll recur it with Devious Cover-Up at some point. So let's not get too hasty here. All right, so I'm going to play a Gorgon in case they have any way to play a haste creature and kill me with me at 2. Opponent kills it. That's fine. I'm not going to fight over the Gorgon. It was just a insurance policy anyway. There's a good chance for me to recur my Sprite. So I'm going to take that chance. This way I can sit on my cheap counterspell backed up by my expensive, or vice versa, as opposed to sitting on 2. Even though I could have disdainfully stroked that, it was more mana efficient to use the 4-drop there and improve my deck at the same time. Now I'll go for the cheap one and keep the disdainful, so that I can shuffle in 2 counters instead of just 1, and because I want to be able to deal with something that has recursion effects. Unfortunately, I've hit a massive, massive flood here. If you've noticed, it's been nothing but lands. There are 18 cards in my deck. There's 17 lands in my deck, and I've got 10 of them in play. So the deck is 18 cards with only 7 lands, or 1 in hand also, so only 6. I'll make that 5 lands left. I think that was 5 lands in a row here for me. But my opponent is also flooding out a little bit, so this is kind of the only saving grace. Opponent goes for a card advantage spell, so this is going to have to be my last Devious Cover-Up, but I do get to shuffle in 2 counterspells. So I am completely out of gas now and on the defensive with very limited defensive options depending on what it is that my opponent's trying to do. And I just draw more early defenses. Like out of how good my deck is with the reshuffles, the high quality of cards in my deck, you'd think that I should be finding something here. All right, this will work. So take that out, and then here I get to convoke, or surveil rather, a Dream Eater into my hand and get the last card out of my opponent's hand and draw a card. And Dream Eater is going to start. The whole engine just started, so I can use Dream Eater and Thought Erasure to get going. So turns out this card does have some use, right? For this exact situation. Oh, I'm getting ratted? Phooey. All right, well, I'm going to bounce the rat at the end of my opponent's hand. I would have played Deadweight on it anyway if it was just not a rat, most likely. Look for counter magic. And find it, actually. So now I can take that rat right out of their hand. Counter Scepter. I get the counter magic into my hand and the Sprite into play, and boom, engine acquired. Plus, I get to beat down. I get to start the beat down. My opponent's at 27, so not a huge beat down, but it is something. I'm kind of glad they're at 27 because it gives me more time to enjoy. This part of getting to this part in the game is such a pleasure. All right, so Sprite. I don't need an extra Sprite there. It's funny, I shuffled 1 extra in and then didn't need it. I'm going to go Thought Erasure for their hand to see what's going on over there. It's a Whisper Agent. Bit of a pain. But lets me surveil. I put a counterspell on top. I'm going to draw that, and then goodbye. Goodbye, Whisper Agent. Opponent runs out a District Guide, which is no problem. I'm holding Etrata. I'm going to errata that to say that it can't attack. All right, so I'm going to smash in again. Leave Double Agent on top. I got to be careful. My library is only 7 cards, so I need to have enough time to play a Devious Cover-Up. All right, yeah, so I play Etrata there. I think a lot of times what happens is my opponents are like, oh, well, I'll just deck him. That's if I can just hold out long enough. And then when I play this guy, they're like, oh, it's going to reshuffle itself back in. I guess I won't, and then they just scoop. But of course, if they hadn't, I'm going to play the Disinformation Campaign here, draw another card, play a land and pass. And, well, actually, I think I would hold a land because I don't want to have to counter Burglar Rats. Obviously, my opponent really likes the card. I'd rather just throw Swamps away to him and ignore the dumb things. So anyway, goes pretty smoothly there. And I think that was both games there. So move on to Piano Man. But of course, if my opponent doesn't, the other thing to be aware of, I guess, is that if my opponent doesn't play at all, if they just stop playing cards, at some point I need something that I can target with my counterspell to recur. And whatever I target is going to be exiled permanently. So I want to be careful to hold maybe some bad plays, like removal that I don't care about, that I could then counterspell and then reshuffle in 4 other cards that include the recursive counterspell, plus some junk that I can play and, again, do the same thing. So I can eventually, because it exiles the target, I could eventually run myself out of cards if my opponent just refused to play a card ever. But there's the matter of me attacking them for damage, so that's simply not going to work for them. They're going to have to play cards, and then, of course, I get to counter their spell and recur, and that's why it's a pretty powerful trap. Anyway, I've got a gorgeous hand here with an early sprite. In fact, every hand with an early sprite is a gorgeous hand. My opponent's got the perfect curve, sprite into agent. Mills off a island there. I'm going to go ahead and play land and land centipede pass, because if they kill the centipede, I get a 2/3 sprite and they have to stop attacking with their sprite. And if they don't kill the centipede, they can't attack with their agent, right? Unfortunately, my opponent had discard, and they take out a counterspell from my hand, but I have a second one. So with a very low-handed opponent, I will try to counter the Notion Rain here. Nailed it, and recur my other counterspell. Opponent swings in. I'll go ahead and chump. They put their card on top. That's a bummer. I want them to stop attacking. I don't want them to have access to sprite capabilities. Oh, nice. Counterspell on top. Pass. I'm holding the swamp in case they have discard. They bounce my centipede, but now I've got the hexproof guy. The problem is I have to block here or else I'm giving them cards, so I get traded there. And they're back to having, they've broken out of the Night Vale Sprite prison, so it's unfortunate. I decided I want to get the land down because I'd like to play the centipede. And I'm going to need, darn those yawns, I'm going to need enough lands to do so. Fortunately, my opponent gets a Veiled Shade there, but I find a sprite. I don't want maybe swamps as much as I want islands, so I mill off the swamp, kill his guy, and pass. What I really like to find, though, is my engine that goes with my sprite. So I want to show you something important. So I had removal for the shade, but what I decided to do is I know that the sprite is the key card in these decks, so I actually killed the sprite. I'm going to kill the shade eventually with one of these blockers, probably the Death Touch blocker, right? So we'll get to that, but for now, I now have sprite advantage, and sprite advantage means card selection ability as well as the potential to get my engine going. And for that, I decided it was more important to just take some damage for a little while. And my opponent does manage to play this Whispering Snitch, which is really interesting. It drains life for 1 whenever you surveil. So a heck of a sweet combo with sprite, and a really good thing, maybe a really good thing, certainly not a bad thing that I killed the sprite there, because being drained life for 1 over and over is no fun. Although getting hit with a shade is no fun either. All right, I realize I need to actually keep lands on top of my deck, and I also need to be a little bit more aggressive, and I take a chance here, and I play the centipede right at the worst possible time. Dang it. All right, so at least they don't have a sprite here. All right, so enough of that tapping out, but now what's nice is my opponent's not really, like, if they send in to the centipede here, yeah, so I get to just do this. I know the top card of my library is removal, but it's based on the number of creatures in my graveyard, and I now have exactly enough creatures so that I can attack. Oh, campaign on top. We're almost there. Necrotic Wound here and finish off his guy because I chump blocked, and I'm hitting for 2 now per turn instead of 1. So I take a little bit of damage. There's a campaign. Now I just need 1 more mana to, I throw away a Trata. I need 1 more mana to play a 3-drop and a Devious. And it's very important to me that I'm able to do that, so I'm just going to wait it out. Agent, go away. The game that I had where I wanted no lands, now I just want lands. Opponent runs a Dimir Foreman out so they can get their Disinformation campaign back up. But it's just a crappy 1/4. I'm not going to counter that. I will, however, go after the campaign. Attempting to reshuffle my other counter magic back in, and it sticks, along with a couple more solid threats that are hard to deal with. Okay. Ooh, nice. Campaign down. Card from hand up. Smash. Pick up campaign. Campaign down again. I'm going to scepter book them again. Slam. The opponent now only has one card left. Well, two. Ritual of Soot, which actually would have killed the sprite. But the last card is Artful Takedown. Okay, well, I'm going to Thought Erasure the other card in their hand, which lets me get a Disinformation Campaign back up and play a blocker. I certainly would feel bad. I've got control of this game, I thought, and then opponent top decks Disinformation Campaign into a sprite. Holy smokes, man. All right, luckily I managed to kill that and play my own campaign. Play a Plague Crafter here, clearing off a Plague Crafter and Junkie 1/4, smashing for 3 in the air. There's a chance that I can just pressure my opponent to the point that they're going to lose. Opponent's recurring Disinformation Campaign. This is so bad. All right, Gorgon goes away. Okay, there's a sprite. So I'm gonna surveil first, and then play Disinformation Campaign. Take the last card out of their hand to protect my sprite. Play my sprite. It was a 3/4 flyer. That's nice, because that would have stopped my 3/3. Smash in, because I still feel like I'm winning the race here. My opponents look into top deck a surveil effect. Hopefully it's a sprite, right, with the hand that I've got. Ooh. I'm sorry. So they top deck, and whatever it is that they top deck, it doesn't deal with 2 flyers. And unless they can surveil and drain life me, which clearly if they could have, they would have played it. So they cannot. I'm going to attack for 4 in the air, and they're going to lose to just damage. So I was almost in complete control, and very soon would be, because obviously I can remove the snitch with Necrotic Wound, and then my opponent's pretty much hosed at that point with the Disinformation loop going. But they scoop to death, which is that's a good reason to scoop. Anyway, so we move into game 2, I believe. And I sideboard in green for the one. I told you I had one sideboard card, and there it is. Destroy target flyer or enchantment card. Extraordinarily good against the Dimir deck, right? Because a Disinformation Campaign, the sprites, and everything else. All right, we are rocking and rolling now. So I managed to mill off a card there. I don't need a second swamp, I don't think, for a little while. Get into my opponent's hand, take a control magic away, and leave them with this hand here. So they've got a Junkie Dimir Informant. They put some cards on top, so I know that they found a swamp. I'm going to leave my counter magic on top. Take out their Informant while I can. Pass. So I'm assuming down comes the 2/3, but it's a black that comes into play tap. They do, however, have a sprite, so I know exactly what's in my opponent's hand. I'm going to kill that thing and have a counterspell up. Find a Necrotic Wound. I don't want that. What I want right now is my engine. And pass, holding the island because of rats, potentially. Opponent goes for Darkblade Agent. I'm going to sabotage that because of tempo purposes. Leaving my opponent with just strands, but no, it's completely stranded in their hand, right? And I top deck Disinformation Campaign. Opponent has a bounce spell here. Surveils. And I replay the sprite and pass. Because if they don't have a creature right now, they do. They have to sack their own sprite to deal with my sprite, or else they're going to lose. And I top deck sprite. And they top deck Campaign. Fortunately, well, I have Crushing Campaign. Campaignity. I don't know. Anyway, that doesn't work. But my opponent's left with 1 card in hand, and I'm going to take that away now. Find myself a land and pass. And they're in the sprite trap. And boom, there it is. Counter magic, go. I'm going to go ahead and continue to mill through, looking for more counter spells, of course. All right, pass. In case of rats, always hold an extra card if you can. Or in case of a Disinformation Campaign that you can't counter, since Disdainful Stroke won't stop it. When it goes for a Capture Sphere, obviously I'm going to try to prevent that. Even though I'd love to 2 for 1 on Plague Crafter, I'm getting way too much value out of sprites to get that greedy. Okay. On the Locket pass, down to 15 cards, not too shabby. Out controlling the control deck. Opponent plays a Darkblade Agent with a superior control deck at this point. Found a counterspell. Great. I'm going to get the counterspell into my hand, play a tap land, and pass. I'd like to deal with their creature, but unless it actually gets the ability to surveil, it's just a 2/3. So I can trade life for tempo here. And it's a good thing I did, perhaps, because I would have liked to, if I played crawlered that, and then they got the 3/3 flyer, I lose my engine, right? And I'm in big trouble at that point. All right, so let's get another card in hand. Oh, there's another counterspell. Excellent. So I'll just place some mana and pass. Opponent still doesn't have a surveil effect. And instead goes for a shade. I'm going to, so I don't want my opponent to throw shade, so I'm going to go ahead and deal with that. Smash in here. Get another counterspell. Now it's like the second or third disdainful stroke of the game. Go ahead and pick that back up. Play land and pass. I'd like to 2-for-1 them with the Dream Eater on the 2/3. So I'm just going to wait. All right, so they empty their hand conveniently for me. So now I can just play a free Dream Eater if I want to. But I said what I really want to do is draw and dig to the bottom of my deck as fast as I can. I'm looking for another hard counter or something that's really hard for my opponent to deal with. So what I'm hoping happens here, so I decided I'm just going to play crafter that thing away and use the Dream Eater for their next threat. So I'm good, I'm chilling. And I've got exactly 8 mana here, thinking I can Dream Eater plus stroke. And my opponent's got Unmoored Ego. What? This is not good. All right, so I'm setting it up so that there's a devious, but my opponent is more devious than I and names the correct card. So that's gone now. I only have 6 cards in library. So we're going with plan B, which is beat down plan. And I'm going to deploy and draw and hope that my opponent cannot deal with this pressure. Because I now have actually 7 damage on the board and a disdainful stroke, plus the ability to make them pick up a card and discard at instant speed. Well, their removal's 4 mana, and that'll do. Smash, death. So, sweet little sideboard tech from my opponent, bringing in the Unmoored Ego to break my loop, and it only worked because I didn't have my my disdainful or my hard counter. I didn't have one of my 2 hard counters, my deviouses or my 3 mana hard counter in my hand when they played it, or else that wouldn't have worked. But yeah, it actually did break the loop, forcing me to just kill them. So that's what we did there. And then match 3, round 3, game 1. I've got a turn 2 Thought Erasure going first, so I decided I'm going to keep it because I should be able to find some extra mana, either off the Thought Erasure's ability or off the Discovery here. My opponent has a pretty good hand of early threats. So 4 cards that I know about. Finds the red mana that they need. So I've got a little bit of a slow start. I'm going to go ahead and play Centipede here, hoping to go Centipede Plaguecrafter. Opponent bashes in. That's fine. Decide for some reason I want to go Agent. That way I can block. I keep messing up because I forget about this Menace, how that works, but this will be fine. A 3/4 blocker on the ground is good. Go ahead and plague away one of their creatures and attack. Only because they have a flyer. Opponent pumps the heck out of their creatures. They have 1 unknown in hand, but they're mostly out of gas. However, I'm at 4. And plays a Mentor. So now I've got a pretty rough spot here because I'm at 2 and my opponent's playing red, and I don't know how much strike damage they have. But I do have a bunch of counter magic in hand. So I'm feeling okay about the situation, not great. All right, so I'm going to pass with Dream Eater up so that I can start, so I can be less afraid of the 4/4. It's got 3 cards in hand. I'm going to go ahead and dig as well. This, of course, triggers Darkblade Agent. Wow, 4 lands. I don't need them just yet. So we'll go ahead and bounce that. Hopefully I'm not getting burnt out. No, just removal. Okay. Dead weight is going to take care of the vigilance creature if I want it to, and I think I do. But I decide, I guess, I'm not sure why I didn't play dead weight there. I should have. I guess I was waiting. Oh, I know, because I knew that he had the 2/2 flying haste, and I didn't want to deal with the flyer. All right, so we'll take that out there, take that out now, and go ahead and smash in there because I have the 3/3 hexproof blocker. Let's improve my board a little bit. I do want to get my agent going, but I'm not quite ready to do so. All right, now I can go. So we'll swing in, put a counterspell on top, draw it, play land, and play the Pitiless Gorgon. Tapping the locket only because I'm not going to tap out and sack the locket. And against the deck playing red, here's a good reason why. So fortunately, this card, which does 2 points of direct damage and can be flashed back with the Jumpstart ability, just got exiled. Thank goodness. Okay. All right, so we're on the card drawing train. Opponent's just sitting there in a tough, can't really attack, can't really block situation. Now I can sack this thing safely because I can hold counter magic up while doing it. We'll get in there. There's Disinformation Campaign, which is going to make this game hopeless for my opponent. Why don't we do exactly that? Kill off their flyer. Play my shade. So here's the thing. I thought about playing the campaign, but it was pretty clear to me at this point in the game that my opponent's hand was probably not action spells that I need to concern myself with. So instead of using the campaign on this turn when I've already spent a bunch of mana, I just cleared out his guys and played another flyer with the idea that if he has another haste creature, I have blockers now. I have 3 blockers, so it would be very hard for my opponent to get anything through 2 counters, up to 2 counters, and 3 blockers. And since if they don't do that, if they don't push anything through, I win next turn. So I figured, yeah, we'll just wait on that because next turn I can go in with everything, right? So good game 1 where I managed to stabilize against a red deck at 2 life despite them drawing a flashback burn spell. Jump-started burn spell. I'm just going to call it flashback because that's what it is. Just flashback with a card. All right. So game 2, I've got a great, I've got Night Veil Sprite, right? I mean, I keep saying it's a great hand, but it also what makes the hand really good though is that I've got removal. So I'm going to go out and actually steal some tempo here, then play the Sprite and sit on even more removal. Opponent gets a 5/2 Mentor out. So I'm going to attack and see what the best option is for me. Well, it's to mill off Dream Eater, which is starting to make my Necrotic Wounds useful. But for now, for mana expediency, I'm going to Plague Crafter that 3/5/2. And I assume I'll have other targets with dead weight later. All right, so opponent gets a 4/3. I'm going to go ahead and put the Swamp on top. I'm looking to get that going. Plague Crafter, the other creature, looking to get that going with the Night Veil Flying Death Touch Hexproof. Mona gets 2 1/1s out and an Ornery Goblin. They're down to only 2 cards in hand, though. All right, so there's an Agent. We'll go ahead and keep that, because that gives me something to do in conjunction with my Sprite. And it looks like I'm safe here. Opponent plays Risk Factor, so, okay, I'm going to pause. All right, so they swing in with Goblin, and I forgot, I can't really block this thing effectively, but I've got a lot of life, so I'm just gonna be ready to block it later on down the road. So they play Risk Factor, which it's a jumpstart card, so they're gonna be able to play it twice, in which they either draw 3 or I take 4, my choice. So at 20 life, I'm taking 4. It's a no-brainer. I'll take 8 off of this thing. So it is a 3 mana card that's going to deal 4 and then play itself again and deal another 4. At the cost of another card, but it's going to do nothing. So it's life for cards. That's the game that the red deck wants to play and the control deck wants to play, which is why sometimes these matches are a bit of a toss-up, because the control deck wants to trade life for card advantage, and the red deck wants you to do that. It wants to trade card advantage for your life. So kind of an interesting card right there. Anyway, so here I block the fairy. I block one of the fairies, but they've got a Take Heart to pump with. So I'm just going to sit here and not worry too much about it. Block a fairy, look for another combat trick. I find one from them, and I necrotically wound the creature before it can kill my guy. So now I've 2-for-1 them there. This now allows me to swing in and put a counterspell into my hand and remove the last threat that they have, which leaves my opponent with just a risk factor and whatever unknown cards in their hand. So I'll just pay some life. My opponent's empty-handed, and I'm at 7. That's where the control deck wants to be when you're drawing 2 cards per turn and you have 2 counterspells in hand. The only thing better would be if I was making them discard a card every turn, but hey, you can't have it all. I just complain about my bad luck, right? All right, another sprite is nice, but what I'm actually doing is putting lands on top of my deck so I can hit land drops. So now I'm up to a point where I can actually cast 2 counters per turn. So I do find a 7-mana counter. So with that in mind, it's probably safe to go ahead and run out some additional cards there. And I've got either the defensive cover-up or the devious cover-up or the sinister sabotage there. And if my opponent, of course, has no play, then soon enough I get to draw with Locket. Basically, my opponent is locketed out of the game, and they know they're locked out, so they're just conceding right here. And so that's basically the deck in action. As you can see, Sprite is the engine that makes it all work. It was tuning my deck as we were going. It was powering up my necrotic wounds, and it was, of course, supercharging Darkblade Agent and the other cards, the other Surveillance Matters cards. So this NSA deck here, very, very good. And that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this deck as much as I enjoyed playing it, because I had an absolute blast. Again, this was the final, this is the final build here of dadgum. Anyway, where it ended up, a nice balance between creatures and spells, good lands, and very, just overall, I say very, very strong deck. I would happily enjoy playing again. So I'm going to try another round most likely, and we'll see how things go. But this is a fun format, a fun deck, and it makes me wonder if there's a between the fact that you've got like a Thoughtseize here, an incredible card drawing engine off of the Disrupting Scepter+jayemdae tome effect, and these Nightveil sprites to improve your draws as well as trigger all that stuff. I really wonder whether or not Standard could be affected by something like this or some other format. It's actually kind of interesting to me. So let me know what you think. Hopefully you enjoyed these decks. And again, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.